All right, so it took me a little while to write this, and I tried and tried to memorize it, but that is impossible for me to do. So I'm gonna have to be like Joe Biden with a teleprompter here and just kind of read this off my laptop. So this one's gonna be called Work versus the Slavery of Inflation, Debt, and Taxes. After seeing a multitude of thumbnails for videos on people leaving the workforce en masse, doing the bare minimum, etc., my curiosity got the best of me and I started researching it. Amazingly, I somehow knew there had to be more to it than laziness, porn, video games, and free basements to live in. The mainstream media wants to shame this entire thing without telling any of the truth behind it. I've probably read 1,000 comments on the videos too. It seems to be a worldwide phenomenon. In China, they call it lying flat. The last couple of videos I watched were an excellent one by Wrangler Star called The Real Reason Americans Aren't Returning to Work, and an excellent one by Academy of Ideas called How Inflation Enriches Politicians and the 1%. I decided to do my own to offer my own perspective. Before I start here, I want to preface this by saying, yeah, I know it's pretty negative and I've heard it a million times. Don't focus on the negative, only focus on what you want to see. But if you see someone dressed in all Balenciaga gear creeping on a child in a dark alley, are you just going to look away or are you going to do what you got to do? Evil flourishes in the dark. If people don't know about something, how's it ever going to get better? First point I want to make is you can't really blame the current younger generation for a lot of what's going on. Yeah, they might have ADD because of TikTok and believe all kinds of garbage because of social media and our disgusting so-called education system. But the real problem started multiple generations ago. For example, the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1914, or the gold Caesars of the 1930s. If that generation had refused to allow that and amended the Constitution to protect our right to have a real currency, it never would have turned into digits on a computer backed by absolutely nothing now. I believe people are waking up to the unfortunate reality that the previous social contracts that motivated a lot of us to work are completely gone. People are realizing that the banks, the government, and most big corporations operate fundamentally against us. Frequently, the harder we work, the bigger and more powerful they become, while we only lose our freedom, time, energy, health, and even shorten our lifespans. Far too often, we end up doing the exact opposite of what we really want to do with our lives, watching the possibility of achieving our dreams slowly fade away. Back in the 1950s, a man could get a normal job out of high school, and as long as he worked hard, pay for a house, 2 cars, and support his wife and kids. That is statistically almost impossible nowadays. Real wages have gone down, while the cost of everything has gone up to a staggering degree. Wealth is more consolidated in the hands of the few, and most of what the average person really owns is debt. In Wrangler Star's video, he mentions a welder making $27 an hour. That seems like a decent wage until you look at the cost of everything these days. According to the St. Louis Fed, the median home price in Q4 of 2022 was $467,700. What used to be a normal family SUV, the GMC Yukon, is over $100,000 with some option packages. Yet the median household income is only about $71,000. Not to mention all the taxes we pay. To quote the 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. But if you add everything up, property tax, sales tax, registration, income tax, etc., especially when you factor in the tax of inflation as a result of government debt, it's over 50% of your income. Is that not slavery? We're all familiar with no taxation without representation, the battle cry that founded America. But according to taxfoundation.org, in 1776, there were no corporate, payroll, or income taxes. Instead, there were only tariffs and excise taxes that averaged about 10% of the value of goods. Since then, taxes have only gone up, and more illegal, unconstitutional taxes have been added over the years. I can't help but wonder, how far will it go? Why were people willing to fight then and not now? Are they too busy trying to figure out what bathroom to use, or what group is supposedly oppressing what other group? As you can see, it's just not adding up financially. In Wrangler Star's video, the welder quit when he found out his employer was charging $200 an hour for the $27 they were paying him. At 41, I'm not old enough to have experienced how it was generations ago. But I know the massive discrepancy between the bottom and top of the ladder wasn't anywhere near what it is today. I would say the most prevalent sentiment in the comments sections is how employers don't care at all about employees anymore. They say they pay as little as possible, demand as much as they could get away with, and fire people over things like hearsay or over private decisions like choosing to not get an RNA modifier sold as a vaccine. I view the term human resources as a nauseating reflection of this, as if we're a resource like electricity or fuel instead of human beings with lives that matter outside of the company. I believe the way forward is to be self-employed, although at this point I'm not yet myself. Being self-employed cuts out the profit taken by an employer, allows you to cut your taxes, removes the threat of being fired, allows you to set your own hours, allows you to reinvest profits how you see fit, and provides a direct feedback loop to you for what works and what doesn't. Personally, I just quit my job doing metal fab welding for a corporate farm. I can relate to a lot of Wrangler Star's video in the comments under it because I've seen it too. I've seen companies turn their entire workforce over in a few years, treating their employees like they're a disposable resource to be used up. To me, it's unacceptable to work a job that's going to hurt my body, my health, and therefore my future for pennies on someone else's dollar. And there are millions of guys running their bodies into the ground building the infrastructure of our society, making their employer rich while turning themselves into a cripple by 60, hoping they'll get a piece of all the taxes they paid back with Social Security. Where I was, they said, no one from around here wants to work, but that's not true, they just don't want to pay. Their entire workforce is guys from other countries aside from the well-paid family employees. They're hiring guys to do skilled mechanic work on heavy equipment for $17 an hour, just to shade over fast food wages. They have a well-insulated shop, but won't heat over about 40 degrees. They tape over the thermostat in the break room to keep employees from turning it up over 55. We are being farmed just like the hogs, and they throw the sick and dying hogs onto the same pile as the dead ones. Anyway, my experience there aside, I think more people are realizing that working hard in a system designed to transfer wealth from the working class to the top can be entirely futile. One way this is done is through debt and inflation. To quote Thomas Jefferson, "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered." Let that sink in for a minute. Think about how many homeless people there are in the country. Think about the tent cities in California. Think about how everyone is in debt. Add up the amount of debt, mortgage, car loans, student loans, credit card debt. What do we actually own? All right, back to the thing here. One example of how this wealth transfer works is someone with access to credit buys a house and then rents it out to cover the mortgage. The renter buys the house for the investor while enriching the bank and the depositor with an account growing with compounding interest, while the loan itself, being money created out of nothing added into the economy, steals from the rest of us by reducing the purchasing power of our dollar. The working class people are paying for the investment class. This hit me one day driving by a construction site and then by a big sign that said Expansion Capital Group. When I realized the site was likely financed with debt or money created out of nothing, I realized that expanding capital, or every loan given out, is actually theft from the rest of us, since it dilutes the value of the money we possess. It's theft by the banks and the rich who benefit from it. As of now, 2023, the dollar only has about 3 cents left of its original value. I don't think most people really understand how the fractional reserve actually works. 10% reserve doesn't mean that they have $100 can loan out 90. It means if you deposit $10, they loan out 100. But it gets even worse. From federalreserve.gov, as announced on March 15, 2020, the board reduced reserve requirement ratios to 0% effective March 26, 2020. This action eliminated reserve requirements for all depository institutions. So, in case you're wondering why everything is going up so much in price, now you know. The Fed removed the reserve requirement entirely, allowing absolutely unchecked money creation and inflation. Of course, the real reason this system exists isn't just to benefit the banks and the rich, it's to finance the government. Without the Federal Reserve, a privately owned corporate entity, about as federal as Federal Express, so to speak, giving the government trillions, indirectly taxing us by destroying the value of the dollar. The government would have to tax us directly, which would drastically limit their size and expenditures. Trying to get us to pay $30 trillion or whatever the national debt currently is with direct taxes is something our leaders think might lead to civil war or total collapse. So they do it the sneaky way. Also, speaking of sneaky things, our income tax going to pay interest on a debt created out of nothing and backed by nothing is purely a wealth transfer to the bank. The people who designed this system refer to it as ameliorated slavery. Hopefully, I've explained debt well enough to see that as something to be avoided. Because of how banks work, I don't have an ethical problem with anyone robbing them either. They rob us every day. As a side note, in Islam, interest is haram, or a sin. Apparently, they understand how this works. The solution to this, of course, is eliminating any type of fiat currency. Currency should be backed by something that is impossible to create out of thin air. You can't inflate a currency backed by gold to the point of pure lunacy if there's only so much gold. I believe replacing the banking system of debt with real currency would solve most of the problems in the world, in addition to probably doubling our standard of living, as long as government greed with direct taxes was kept in check. Obviously, we don't need a government anywhere near as big as what we have now. Most of the federal government could be eliminated. Some people would even argue that we don't need any government at all. If you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend Michael Malice. While on the subject of government, I want to address the rise of socialism in the younger generations. This is something I do find fault with them for. They see problems, but out of ignorance blame it on capitalism when we actually have 9 out of the 10 of Karl Marx's planks of communism. All it takes is a brief look at history to see what communism accomplishes. It destroys the productive person's desire to put forth effort by depriving them of the product of their effort, instead giving it to government, which wastes it with greed, inefficiency, and uses it to finance violence and oppression, while rewarding the minority with crumbs. The result is massive poverty with an absolutely corrupt government at the top. The more socialist the government becomes, the more it discourages people from doing anything over the minimum to survive. Instead of trying to merge Facebook with teledildonics so they can fuck us all directly, one socialist idea pushed by leftist technocrats these days is universal basic income. They say in the future robotics and automation are going to replace so many jobs that people simply won't be able to work. So their idea is just to give them money for nothing. But that money can only come from direct taxation, which will suppress or even collapse the economy, or the indirect taxation of debt, which will continuously inflate the currency until it collapses. If you step back and look at the big picture, have you ever wondered why our leaders usually do what's not in our best interests? What makes our lives more and more difficult in virtually every possible way? The reason why is they want to reduce our population dramatically. The proof is how many of us they've killed in wars. Dropping bombs on cities full of civilians is more evil than anything Satan could dream up. Without leaders, without government, without financing wars with debt, most wars simply would have never happened. Think about that for a minute. Almost every aspect of our society, of the society we have, is their design. It's not our design. It's not what benefits us. It's not what we want. It's what they want. The direction they're pushing it now is a central bank digital currency with most people in ultra high population density cities packed full of childless soy latte sipping beta males and bisexual women who only go straight when Chad comes around, with cameras everywhere to support their social credit system, and very little, if any, property ownership. The minority, people like myself, are going to be out in the country using real money in an underground economy, growing crops and raising animals, but we're still going to have tech, and we're going to be the ones with the weapons. Occasionally, the government will try to fight us, but I don't think their motivation will be very high, since they'll mostly have what they want with people in the cities. If you doubt they'll be able to get the majority to live like that, look at how many people voluntarily wore the masks and accepted lockdowns. Look how many took the RNA modifier without question. That tells me they're not going to resist anything else either. They'll disarm, own nothing, and claim to be happy in their cucked, soy-fueled utopia. But while they're not reproducing, instead wasting their lives twiddling themselves teledildonically in their virtual world, us out in the country are going to become more numerous and powerful until we take everything over, including what's left of government. And when we write a new constitution, the right to bear arms, the right of self-ownership, the right to refuse taxes, and the right of property ownership will be right at the top.